What if you could step inside the mind of your favorite authors? Not their book, not their blurb, but their thinking. Welcome to the author's mind. This is where fiction is dissected, decoded, and rebuilt from the inside out. With your host, Shiloh Creed. Each episode is a deep, honest conversation with working fiction authors. If you write, if you read, if stories matter to you, this is your place. Welcome to the Author's Mind, where we dive deep into everything authoring. We look at craft. We kind of take apart how authors do what they do. Today's episode is near and dear to me because Peter Last is an author who I've worked with before on manuscripts. We have beaten up each other's books, so I'm super excited to get to talk with him today about his writing process and everything that he has done throughout his career. He does mention that he was very nearly born in an elevator and has been unconventional ever since, and I would definitely say since he started writing at 11 years old and finished his third book by the time he was 19, he definitely has an interesting story to tell. Peter, welcome to the Author's Mind.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So how do you think that your unusual start, the elevator story, and I know that you have a large family, how do you think that those things have played into and shaped how you tell stories?
As you mentioned, I'm from a big family, 10 children in the family. I'm number 6, in case you were wondering. I'm as close to a middle child as you could possibly get, right? When there's an even number of children. I always say that I have chronic middle child syndrome. Very early on, I think I kind of decided I'm just going to do things that I want to do. And if other people think that's cool, then fair enough. And if they don't, that's on them. And that's why I started writing, because my family is a family of scientists and engineers. I am an engineer. When I was 11 years old and I decided to start writing my first book, I was actually told by people in my family, basically, we're engineers. We don't do that sort of thing. And I did the 11-year-old equivalent to hold my beer. Watch this. and here we are. So.
Wow. How do you think that your heroes have been shaped by the way you started writing? Like, having that need to sort of step up and say, no, I am going to do it. I am going to accomplish it. Do you think that affected the heroes or the main characters that you write?
I hadn't thought about it until you asked the question. But then when you do, now that you have asked the question, I'm suddenly sitting here thinking, actually you have a good point. And so, for example, we'll say stereotypical hero's journey, might involve fantasy tropes, right? The chosen one, for example. Not a fan of the chosen one trope, and it might actually be because I was never the chosen one.
It all becomes clear.
I was, pick your fantasy novel. We'll say Frodo, right? I'm Frodo. Like, there's literally no reason in particular that he should have been the one to go on the quest for the ring, and yet he was cast into that position and he had to kind of rise to the challenge. That's kind of more or less the types of characters then that I write are people who are sometimes forgotten by society. A series that I'm working on right now that has a character that he actually kind of should be the chosen one, but it's kind of twisted in a way where him being chosen isn't really necessarily a good thing. So he still has to kind of kick what's expected of him and figure out his own path. So hadn't really thought about it until you asked the question, but
That is why having conversations is awesome. It's really interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about your series, Shadow for Hire? Just give us a breakdown of what it is, how many books there are, and what your plans are. Do you have plans for more in that series?
Shadow for Hire is a young adult fantasy series. I say that it is clean fantasy. Violence, but no, there's no swearing and no smut, basically. And it currently has I currently have 2 books out in it. The third one is done, and it is at the publishers, and I am keeping my fingers crossed for a like spring of 26 release date. Um, that will be the conclusion of the series in a chronological sense. However, I am currently planning and working on a series of 4 short story slash novellas that will fall between chapters 2 and 3 of the first book, and then a series of 3 novellas that will fall between the events of book 2 and book 3.
Having read the whole series, I can definitely say that your main characters live outside the box. That was one of the things that really drew me into your writing, was the fact that they weren't what I expected them to be, and it made it intriguing. You wanted to keep diving deeper into their psyche and who they are and the problems that they're facing. So I definitely recommend the series. Wages of Death introduces a world where assassination, theft, and espionage are like part of their job. That's what they do for a living, which in and of itself, is intriguing. But what really inspired you or drove you to center your fantasy series around that instead of that classic hero?
I'm not a classic hero, and they say right what you know. We could sit here and debate whether I'm a hero at all. But the inception of the Shadow for Hire series, because I think that kind of answers most of your questions. So Shadow for Hire was never actually designed as a book. I started it back in, oh goodness, would have been probably 2012-ish, something like that. And actually what it started out as was back when blogs were a thing. I guess I should say a big thing, because they still do exist. But my publisher wanted me to have a blog because they were all the rage. And I'm sitting here going like, about what? Like, no one cares about my life. I barely care about my life. Like, come on. And so I'm trying to come up with something to put in a regular basis to post on this blog that people would actually be interested in reading. And one of the things that I settled on was, what if I wrote a story that's kind of like the written equivalent of a TV show, right? So I call it episodic in nature, in that it's comprised of episodes that are, we'll say, kind of similar to, say, like a sitcom. Not that it's funny, but in the sense that they are same characters. The stories are loosely related to each other, but they didn't have like a strict chronological progression. So you could arguably or theoretically read any particular story without reading the other ones, and it would still make sense.
Right.
And as an aside, a fun fact: the first, so that got me my first 5 stories in the series. The first 4 comprise the first book, and then one of them is the second to last chapter, or third to last chapter in the second book.
Wow.
And you can tell based on some of the names when I wrote them. For example, I wrote Spirit of the Season, which takes place at Christmas time. You'll never guess this, around Christmas time, right?
Wow.
And I wrote one, there's one in the first book, it's the second story, called March Madness. And you'll never guess this, but I wrote it while March Madness was going on. The entire setup of the Shadow, with this construct where I want to be able to write a story that's not chronologically progressive, requires a setup where I can write self-contained stories. The issue with having like a traditional, like, characters are doing things because of their past or because of their moral standing or whatever doesn't work as well, because that's going to lead to a logical progression. By setting it up so that they're just kind of taking contracts allows me to kind of write stories that are drastically different, because it's not based on the whims of the characters doing them. It's more or less based on the whims of the people who are hiring them. So that's actually kind of why I set up the Shadow for Hire series the way that I did. And of course, after I got 5 stories in, I realized it was an actual, like, larger story here. And that's when it actually kind of coalesced a little bit better, starting in book 2.
Wow, that is, I think, the most unique way I've ever heard of a novel, much less a series, coming together. The episodic nature of it had to be interesting from a writing perspective, because short stories, I think they teach you as a writer how to get the framework of a story right, because it really shows. Like, if you have a short story that doesn't follow a good framework, then it is really terrible. Like it shows up really fast. So what do you think, like, was that your first kind of practice at short stories, or had you written other short form before that?
I mean, nothing of significance. I think I had to write some short stories for school projects or something like that. Uh, but what I found out, I agree with you 100%, by the way. Short stories are, even for novelists, a fantastic way of really focusing, you know, your writing skills. Because like you say, you've got a limited number of pages to words to do this in. Because you have a limited number of space to do it in, you really have to focus in on like the point. Not like in a novel where you can meander on this side storyline and that side quest. You really got to focus in on the point. And so I think that they are helpful. What I discovered writing these is I'm terrible at writing short stories because the short story becomes a long story and then the long story becomes a series. This is probably about as close as I'll get to short story writing.
I think it turned out wonderfully. But I think that's part of authorship. That's part of being a writer, is that almost everything, at least for me, almost everything that I encounter in life could turn into a story if I didn't rein in, that part of how my brain works. Like odd things happen and I'm like, oh man, I could write a story about that, right? Do you feel that way? Do you ever feel like you get in a situation and you're like, this should go in a book someday?
All the time. Um, yeah, that kind of goes into what I would say is, people ask about where do you get your ideas from, right? Inspiration. This is something that people ask if you're selling at book fairs or whatever. And it's like literally everything. I've gotten a lot of inspiration actually from just songs that I've heard. Not even like ones with lyrics, like instrumental songs. And it builds the scene in your head. Or you're watching a movie and you see something, you're like, that's a really good character arc. I'm going to steal that. The difference from most of those things is in most cases, what it does is it provides pieces to the story, like a character arc or like a relationship or an ending or a twist or something like this. And they aren't actually the inspiration for like a self-contained story, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes, it does. Once was writing my first novel, and I hadn't gotten very far into it, and I wasn't an intentional writer. I never wanted to be a writer, so I was just kind of playing around with it. And I had a cup of tea, and it was back when those mugs with the black insides were really popular. Had like the color on the outside, black on the inside. So I had my cup of tea, and I took a big drink of it because it had cooled down, and something that was not tea was in my mouth. And I promptly spewed it across the countertop, and there was this huge centipede. It had been in my mouth. Thank God it was already dead. But that was obviously a very formative moment for me, and it definitely went into a book. It went into Archer under one of my other pen names, Quinn Knightley. But that scene was really fun to write because I had been there. I knew exactly what she was feeling. So I think it's fun to incorporate those little tidbits into our stories because they're like the fireworks, right? They're the writing that comes off the most genuine. Yeah, I still to this day.
It's like the embellishment on a plate or a mug. Like the plate or the mug would do its job without it, but
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that for one, I write down little scraps of dialogue, little bits of this happened, that happened, and they're really short. Like sometimes it's just literally a one-liner, and I have them all kind of categorized into characters. Do you do the same thing? How do you catch those moments of brilliance? Do you have a system for writing those down, or how do you handle that?
so it depends. There's two different ways that this can happen. If it's just like a generic thing, I have what I call my writer's warehouse. And I categorize things into my ideas into, I think, four different areas. You have world ideas, you have character ideas, you have twist ideas, like plot twists, and then there's a fourth one, and I can't think of it off the top of my head right now. And so I'll think of something, and I'll literally put it in there. I'll just put it in the writer warehouse, and it's fantastic because it's like this is something that would be cool in a book, but I don't have a story to put it in. I'm not going to build a story around it. But what it allows me to do is later when I do have a story and I'm writing a character, for example, and the character's feeling a little bit flat, I can run over to my character or my idea warehouse and I can page through ideas and be like, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. Oh, this one would actually fit pretty well with this character.
In there.
So that's like general ideas. Absolutely 100% of the time happens when I'm working on a book, all the way from planning it to like finishing it. But usually this is more common in the planning stages than the writing stages, is thinking through just whatever. Sometimes it's thinking through particular scenes and these come up. Sometimes it's literally just thinking through the book as a whole and your brain starts rabbit trailing, And like
Yep.
you say, it could be literally as little as a monologue, like a one sentence monologue. It could be a two-sentence exchange. This person says this person responds this. It could be, and I've got actually the series that I'm working on right now. I was just last night typing up stuff like this, and it just goes in the list of stuff that's going to go in the book, but I don't know precisely exactly where it's going to go yet. And again, that's really great because some of the things exactly where they're going to go. I just haven't gotten there yet. And so when I get there, I just put it right in. We, brush it up, make it work for the scene, and then you're on. Some of it I don't know exactly where it's going to go, and so if you are writing along and then you have a scene that's feeling kind of boring, then you're like, oh, well, I need this to happen to
Yep.
foreshadow what's going to happen in the future. So let's just put it here in this boring scene, and it'll spice the scene up, and help progress the
Exactly.
story.
Wow. I will say you are way more organized than I am. Mine are just, so I'm a notebook person. Personally, I don't like to write in a computer ever. I like to write in a notebook. So mine are just scribbled down randomly. I have no organization whatsoever. So your system trumps mine for sure. So I have to ask you though, because the percentage of fiction authors who are also engineers is probably very, very low. And I feel like if we really dug into those numbers, we would find that the percentage of fantasy fiction authors who are also engineers would be astronomically lower. So how do you think that being an engineer and writing fantasy, like how did that happen? What was it that made, the way your brain works to be an engineer able to also do fantasy?
I'll tell an anecdote here. So I am an engineer, and that is part of my identity, right? We will say, I do all the. I'm not gonna say I do all the typical engineering things, but I like Legos and I like working with stuff, and I even like computer coding because I'm a nerd, And like I said, I came from a family of scientists and engineers. Like literally, of the 10 children, half of us are engineers, and three of the in-laws, the spouses, are engineers. Like this is just the family that I come from. And so I distinctly remember this. We've had conversations in the past about my memory and my ability to visualize things, but as distinctly as I can remember something, I remember this event. This was when I was pretty young. We were in Alabama by then, so I was older than probably 8, let's say 8 to 10. And Dad, that was back before the internet was like wildly in vogue, and so Dad had brought home, probably on a floppy disk, let's be honest, a program that was like you answer questions and it tells you what kind of a brain you have. Are you left brain? Are you right brain? Are you visual? Are you auditory? This sort of stuff, right? And so I'm number 6 in the lineup. So of course, not being the oldest, I don't get to do it first, second, third, fourth, or fifth, right? By the time everyone's done doing it and like it's my turn, everyone has kind of the novelty has worn off, right? So I'm sitting at
Again,
the computer,
yes.
right? So I'm sitting at the computer doing it myself. And so I do the test. And every sibling prior that had done this, it shows you a little diagram when you're done. It's got the brain, like the head right here, and a dot. And it's like, I forget if it was visual versus auditory and then left versus right, but it puts the dot where it decides that you are. And everyone else, engineers, right? Far left brain, far left brain, far like 99% left brain. And then, visual versus auditory, whatever the other options were, but like heavy, heavy, heavy left brain. So I'm doing the test. And I finish the test and it shows me in my dot, and I kid you not, is smack dab in the center of the head. Like literally
Wow.
not a particular leaning any particular way. And I distinctly remember looking looking at it and going, remembering that all my siblings had ended up with it way to the left, and going, I must have answered the questions wrong.
Wrong.
So I retook the test
That's
and got the
funny.
same result. So the long way to answer your question, which is, I think I honestly actually have a brain that is kind of like right in the middle. So yes, I'm an engineer, but being an author and being creative is also a very, very significant part of my personality as well.
Right. A very interesting story. I know you do a lot of reviews. Love reading your blog reviews. Anybody listening, you should head over to peterlast.com. I particularly like reading the reviews that you leave on books that you don't like, as long as they aren't mine. Because
I believe I read one of your books that I didn't like.
thanks.
Um,
But some of them are just you're first of all so spot on, and you have this really unique ability to read a story and then pull it apart into like different sections and different things so that it can be seen for what it is. What made you want to start doing reviews? Like, what drove you to start doing that on your website?
So two things. The first is actually the same reason that I started writing Shadow for Hire, is to have content for my website, right?
Okay.
I'm creating real short. I'm creating this website, and I'm like, what do you put on the website besides go buy my book? Because if it's just go buy my book, how long does someone sit on that website, right? And so I
Yep.
wanted to have something that would provide benefit to people who like to read. And so I kind of settled on it because of that. But the other reason, so that's why I started to do it. But what I found when I did start to do it is that when I first started, my reviews, I would say, weren't nearly as good or as detailed, specific as they are now. Because I was kind of, and I think most people are here, if, did you like that book? Yeah, I like that book. Why did you like that book? And it's like, well, I don't know. The characters were good, and I just loved this particular part or whatever. And like, that's as far as it goes. Or I really hated that book. Why did you hate that book? Well, I don't know. It just didn't work. But by forcing myself to actually, this is the engineering side of my brain coming in, right? I don't just have a 1 to 5 star rating. I rate it on characters. I rate it on world. I rate it on plot. I rate it on consistency, and then there's probably another one in there someplace. Writing mechanics and stuff. By forcing myself through that review process to pull the books apart and actually be able to articulate why it's a 2 on plot. Like, why is the plot terrible? Like, I can't just go ahead and say the plot's terrible and give it a 2. Like, why is the plot terrible? Why did the characters not work? That
Yeah.
actually helped me with my writing, because once you're forced to just like take it apart to look at it, then it really helps understand all the pieces, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I think what an incredible skill for an author to develop. I know that from having you read a few of my books, that you have an ability to pull out details that I, as the writer of the book, didn't even see. So really, what an incredible skill to have, and something that I would definitely encourage other authors to engage in. Really dive deep. When you read another book, don't just let it be a surface level, but try to really pull apart the character journey and see why you liked it or you didn't. How much do you think in your writing process, like what percentage do you think of your creative energy goes into really like the mechanics, like the structuring,
the world rules and all of that, like framework, the bones of your story.
Sure. Before I answer that, I'm going to give a caveat. I do recommend that every author go and do critical critiques of other books because it helps them. Also because pick authors that you know and like get them some reviews on Amazon and stuff. But I am going to warn you, as soon as you start to do this, you're not going to be able to read bad books ever again. Like not in the same way. I used to just be able to read a book, and now I like read a book and I'm like, oh, I need to write that down. That has to go. So you can't read books the same way anymore once you start doing that, once you get used to it.
Yes.
As to actually like building the book though, the way that, and I'm not particularly smart on this, right? This is just from 22 years of writing experience that I've
Just
built
22
this,
years.
right? So when I'm looking at a book, the analogy that I like to use is writing a book. Writing a book is like building a house. Okay. And actually there's a lot of things that actually correlate pretty well to this. So, for example, there are things in the book that are foundational, but that you never might ever see. So, an example of this would be world building, right? Particularly in fantasy. You spend all this
Yes.
time building this world, and it has to make sense. It has to make sense because as soon as you have a world that doesn't make sense, the reader's going to notice, and it's going to kill their
Yes.
immersion, right? You don't have to explain everything though, right? So for example, you have a magic system that you've spent lots and lots of time developing, and it makes perfect sense. Everything in the book follows the rules. In many cases, you don't even have to spell all those rules out for the reader because them reading it, their brain understands or like kind of latches on to the inherent consistency of the system. Versus if you didn't have that, then they're going to just start latching onto the inherent inconsistencies. And so in the case of something like world building, I'd say it's very similar to an iceberg, right? You do the whole thing, but you only see the top part of it. In the analogy of
Yes.
building the house, something like world building is like your foundation, right? It's all the concrete that you put in the ground, and you see almost none of it, right? Or very little of it in some cases. Some cases you see more, but it is absolutely critical to the story. I would put something like theme in here as well. And by the way, this is something that I've changed my opinion on in the past, let's say 2 to 3 years. Theme is something that, if you use it properly, absolutely undergirds the entire story. And you may never actually spell it out at all, you know, but it informs the entire story. So then you have things like characters, and you have things like, plot, and these are all important. I would analogize these depending on what they are to like the roof. The roof keeps off the rain, right? The walls keep the wind and the elements out. When you get all the way down to something like writing mechanics, which is what your original question is about, and I would say this is more like your paint and your like carpet and stuff like this. The house is technically functional without the paint, or if you put a really bad paint job on the wall, right? But it might also be so bad that you have no desire to live in this house.
Excellent point.
Fortunately, things like that, the finishes are the easiest thing to fix. Percentage wise, I focus on writing mechanics and stuff like that. Probably second editing push and beyond. Of course, the more that you write, the more you get used to it and you just do it as you're going along. But to actually look at the mechanical type stuff, it'd probably be, like I said, second pass of editing and beyond.
No, that's a really interesting way to look at it. I love the iceberg analogy because I think that when writers try to invert that iceberg is when books fall apart. Those are the books that you read a page or two and you put it down because you're not interested in all of that dry content. If writers in general, people who are working on their first book, could simply be willing to just let the tip of the iceberg show, their writing would shine so much better. So I think that's phenomenal advice.
I was to expand the iceberg. It just made me think of this when you're talking about it. So like characters, for example, I'd say the same thing. a character has all this backstory and they've got all this stuff, right? And you don't have to show hardly any of it if you don't want to. Showing all of it is actually kind of like taking the iceberg out of the ocean and putting it on the land, right? You can see the entire iceberg, but when you walk on top of it, it doesn't like bounce and like sway and have any character to it. It's just there. And so explaining too much is, I think, is actually kind of like that. You take all the mystery and like the character and the nuance out of it.
That was like moment. That was really super good. That it doesn't move the way it should. It doesn't have that life to it. That was really cool. Really good analogy. You know, my husband buys and sells a lot of equipment or four-wheelers. It's just his thing, and it is shocking to me how you can take something that's kind of meh, you put a coat of paint on it, and suddenly it's like, wow, look at that thing. So, you know, the bones have to be there. Yes. Sometimes you can, you know what I mean? If the engine is iffy, sometimes if it looks good enough, you know, people don't care. But with writing, that is not the case. We need, as readers, we need that whole story to hold us up. We need everything to work together. So, man, 20%, I would not have labeled it there, but I think you're like completely spot on.
I think 20% is actually high at this particular stage in my life, just because I think because I'm a lot better at writing than I used to be, I just don't have to spend the amount of time on it that I used to.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to know, how did you come up with the shadow, in particular the name for your group of assassins? Was that just like a moment of inspiration? Where did it come from?
So this actually goes back to, you'd think it would be an easy like answer, right? Maybe you wouldn't, I don't know. This is actually a much more complicated answer. So the entire thing, putting aside the fact that I kind of just started writing these to write the stories, as soon as I kind of knew what the trajectory of the story was, the theme and the trajectory of the story informed everything about this. Okay, so the trajectory of the story, or the theme, or what I really, what this, I don't want to say what I really wanted to look at, but what the story chose to look at.
Which is interesting and correct, yes.
which basically was examining how people in the exact same situation can make different decisions and end up in drastically different places, right? And so this kind of informs everything about the series. So I needed a situation that was extreme enough that you could have people in that circle, we'll say, of the shadow, and go this way and go that way, right? So we have something that usually with something like this, it's either going to be someone. In this particular case, I chose some sort of criminal endeavor, right? So it's like, okay, so you have a criminal endeavor. So we've got the people that can go really hard this way. What about the people that we want to go hard in the good direction? It's like, okay, so that you have to have a situation where they don't really understand necessarily what they're doing. And so when it does come time for them to make a choice, they can go this way or they can go this way. And so that's actually why I dialed the ages back. One of the reasons I dialed the ages way far down is because when you're a kid, kids get leeway that that adults don't get, right? Well, they're just a kid. They don't know, right? And so this was kind of the scenario where I could take 4 members of the shadow and put them in the same circle, but with trajectories that are so drastically different that for a certain amount of time, all of their lines are still in the circle. But after that certain amount of time, they're not in the circle anymore, and they're just completely different. And you get to see how the worldview, how the decisions that make change. You know, you got one person who, yeah, it's a criminal endeavor, but basically he's, what's the word that I'm not gullible isn't the right word, but ignorance is bliss, right? Like, doesn't even really think about it that much. It just kind of is the way that it is. And that's a very different outlook, and it produces a very different result than the character who understands like what's going on and rationalizes it, or the character who knows it's bad, can't necessarily rationalize it, but views it as just the best bad option available. and these all produce very different like end points for these characters, or trajectories or paths or character arcs, or however you want to put it. And then when I started fleshing out the story, to answer your original question about the name, the shadow, just the entire theme of examining how people end. You're starting kind of in this dark space, and where do you end up? The theme of like light and shadow and dark and light, definitely started coming out of it. So it worked thematically, it worked for the world, and it worked for their profession. And that's, by the way, it still took me about 2 weeks to come up with the name.
Yes. Oh, it is a lot to develop characters in a world and to do all the things involved with the book, and then to name it, I think, can be hard. Do you ever write your own back cover blurbs, or does your publishing house do that? Or
I would never let anyone else write my back cover blurbs.
okay.
This is actually something where, well, you've known me long enough. I'm opinionated about a lot of things, right? This is something where
Yes.
I'm actually very, very opinionated, though. And the reason that I'm opinionated is because I've seen so many that are just, they're not, what's the best way to put this? The function of a blurb is to market the book, right? You want to get people to read the book and go, that sounds interesting. I want to read that. So at its core, it's a marketing thing. But there is such a thing as marketing so hard that the blurb no longer is like accurate in a sense to what the book is, which is actually paradoxically also bad for marketing in general, because you've made it so good from a marketing perspective that everyone wants to pick it up. But you've also made it not what the book is about, which means once people pick it up, they don't get what they were promised. And that is bad from a marketing perspective. And so I am very, very opinionated about, yeah, I'm not as good at the marketing thing. I'm definitely willing to take people's advice on how to rephrase and restructure things. But also, I'm not going to let someone else write it because I've seen that go bad.
Yes, it is interesting. Do you find personally that writing the blurb is difficult, or where do you land on that?
Like everything with writing, it gets easier the more you do it. So writing a blurb for me is a lot easier now than it was on my first book. But if writing a novel is like here with difficulty, in a short story, because you got to be even more concise, is like here, a blurb is like up here. Like you got to take the essence, not the entire story, right? Because you don't want to give stuff away, but you have to take the essence of the story and cram it into like 150 words. I will say that will expand your vocabulary and really get you to take out every single unnecessary word.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that writing blurbs is one of the hardest things I've ever done, even for a book that is finished, complete, edited. Man, I can sit down to write that blurb and be completely blank, like completely blank, for a unusually long amount of time. Blurb writing is its own deal.
I will say this is that I am actually experimenting with a newish version of like planning the book. And one of the things that's beneficial from that is that along the way, it basically has uh, deliverables, if you will, things that you produce during the planning process that actually get you like 50% of the way to writing the blurb. So that is hopefully going to help the blurb process in the future.
That sounds like something every author needs because blurbs are the most dreaded piece for me for every single book.
Yep.
It's like, how on earth
Yep.
can I possibly condense all of this? So I find personally having somebody outside, my husband or publisher or whatever, that it's helpful to me to have them read it and bounce it back to me. And I need that, like when I'm writing a book, outside like influences, like they'll just bounce off. But man, that blurb, I really need somebody who knows the book to be like helping me with it, because it's not my cup of tea.
That was the blurb actually for Out of the Shadows, which is the third book in the Shadow for Hire series. I had the blurb written. I had it written. I had like 3 or 4 different variations of it. You know, I gave it to my mother-in-law and my wife, and I was like, hey, what do you think about this? well, the first part's okay, but the second part is terrible. You know, now I've got to go and rewrite the entire second half of the blurb. It's better after it's done than it was to begin with, for sure. But it is just one of those things where, like you say, you get so far down this rabbit trail that it's like your brain is incapable of looking at it a different way after a certain point.
Yes, I agree with that. So I had a really formative experience when I went to like 3 big writers conferences within 3 months. I had been up in New York City at one, which I couldn't wait to get away from, not because of the writers, just the city is not my thing. And then there was another one in Alabama. So we were doing, they have a name for it, I can't remember, but you have like your query letter for your novel, and you're actually going into literary agents, you know, and you have like your 5 minutes in front of this person. You walk out of the room, same piece of paper, hand it to the next person, and it's sort of like standing in front of multiple people waiting to shoot you. That's what it feels like to me. So
sounds like speed dating.
It was terrible. So I walk in and I like put my piece of paper down, and she reads it and she's like, you don't need paragraph 2 at all. Just get rid of it. Why is it even there? And she's like, next person. And I'm like, ow, okay. But you walk out and you're like, can I scribble it out? No, I can't reprint. There's no time. Like literally I have to hand the same stinking piece of writing to the next person. So I hand it to the next person, and she reads it and she says, oh, I would get rid of everything except the second paragraph, because the second paragraph is brilliant. And that was such a light bulb moment to me as a writer, because you have to find your people. You have to find the people who engage with your style, your tone, your content, and opinions are individual. Like everybody's going to have an opinion, and you cannot take one person's response to your work and change everything because of it. So have you ever had an experience where you really felt pressured to make major changes that you didn't agree with in your writing?
Yeah. So for sure, I'm gonna quote Ernest Hemingway so that I can sound like intellectual and stuff. Ernest Hemingway has a quote that I think is actually pretty cool. It says, "We are all apprentices," talking about writers, "in a craft where no one ever becomes a master." This is kind of what it made me think of when you were, and that's kind of what I was expecting your story to go when you said you go to the next person. I was like, I bet you they loved the second paragraph. You know, this is the thing, right? Opinions. Everyone has opinions. And what do they say about opinions? Well, there's lots of different ways to say it, but opinions are like dogs. You know, a lot of people have them, and some of them aren't very nice. It just is what it is. Uh, but there, no. So this is actually, to me, I err on the other, not err on the other side. I tend toward the other end of the spectrum. I always say that I'm a cocky. What's the polite way to put this? SOB, I guess. It's not very polite, but um, which is to say, I tend to think that what I produce is good. I mean, which is probably a good thing for me to think that, but the problem is, of course, that if you think too much that way, everyone writes things that aren't good. And so my problem actually is more the other direction, which is people will give feedback and criticism of it. And my initial response is always, I call it the first stage of writer's grief, right? Is to go, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, come on, do you even write a book? And then you tell me stuff like that, and I can't even say that. So, but because you have written books. But it's like, where do you find the line? Because when I take criticism, I always want to give it its due and look at it. Like, give it enough time to, if there's something here, I want to know what it is. But I also don't want to lose the essence of what makes Peter Last's writing, right?
Yes.
And that's very difficult. I honestly, I don't have a good answer for like how do you find the line between that's a good piece of criticism, I'm going to incorporate it, versus no, that this is, we disagree on style, but this is my style, so I'm going to keep it the way that I'm going to keep it. And in what I've kind of come to is there's definitely cases where people give criticism and I think about it from like, you're 100% correct. Like this is not This is not good the way it is. I need to change it. And then there are definitely cases where someone says this, and I'm like, you should do it this way. And I'm like, absolutely. And I think about it for a while. I'm like, no, that's absolutely just a stylistic choice. This is my book. I'm going to write it my style. Anything that's like on the line, I actually just tend towards, no, I'm going to keep it the way it is, because it's probably, if I'm like not able to tell if it's stylistic or not, I'm going to err on the side of it's stylistic, and I'll keep it my way. But it's a difficult thing to do. And I have definitely, on drafts, gone back and forth and back and forth and back and forth between leaving it, changing it on one edit, like multiple times.
Yes. I tend toward the same end of the spectrum as you do, which makes me wonder and think, and really I want to speak something to our listeners who haven't maybe completed their first book yet, who are still, in their beginning stages of their writing journey. I think that the authors who tend to really put a lot of weight on other people's opinions of their work don't finish. And I think that in order to finish, in order to complete your first book, in order to just take those steps, you have to have some sort of resilience, some inner tenacity that just says, I'm simply going to complete, I'm going to do it. And then I can work with it later. So that's what I would encourage anybody who is still in the beginning stages of writing. Go out and speak your voice. Go out and tell your story. And I think one of the hard things to remember is that this story is not your last story. And we can all get way too connected to the story that we're writing now, but there are so many more stories that you will have the opportunity to tell. We are running late on time. Peter, what one piece of advice would you give other writers?
You have all the typical pieces of advice. If you're going to start writing, just write, because you can't figure out how to write until you write, and whatever, stuff like this, which you can find anywhere, which is why that's not going to be my piece of advice. My piece of advice is going to be the thing that I wish someone had told me when I first started writing. And if I'm going to be completely honest, if I were to go back in time right now and tell 11-year-old Peter, okay, this is like the piece of advice you need, 11-year-old Peter would have been like, what do you know? You're just an old person.
So funny.
Feel free to disregard this piece of advice entirely. Most authors, the fantasy series specifically, people who are interested in fantasy and want to be authors, tends this way. Is a lot of people that I met, they want to write because they have this big idea for this grand series, right? Like this, it's going to be 7 books long, and it's going to end building 3 different worlds for it because, 2 different timelines and all this type of stuff, right? And it's like their baby. It's like they're starting off with their swan song. They're, I forget what the term is, but it's like the piece de resistance. Don't write that book initially. Write 3 standalone novels first, okay? Because in my experience, that's about how long it took for me to figure out my writing style. And the problem that I ended up in, because I started writing the series first, was I got 3 books in and my writing style had completely changed. And as a result, I'm actually now rewriting that series. But that would kind of be my thing. That big, great story that you are in love with so much, put it on the back burner, we'll say. You're going to still from time to time go and you're going to think about the characters and you're going to write down all these great things about these characters and you're going to develop the world and the magic system if it's fantasy. You're going to have this sprawling plot that you're going to be able to go, I want to do this, so I got to foreshadow. And you're going to do all of that and it's going to be great. And you're going to do it while you're writing 3 other novels that are standalones, that are not attached to anything, so that you can write it, publish it. It's not good. But later in life, you're like, yeah, it was my first novel. It wasn't great, But it's not holding you back because you don't have anything after it, if that makes sense. That would be my piece of advice.
I love it. And it also speaks so much to the fact that you don't really try being a writer. You don't I'll just try it.
No, you're right.
You go do it. So
yeah.
Well, I think that some people...
None of us are masters in the craft, right? We're just varying levels of apprentice.
Exactly. I love that. That quote's awesome. Peter, have had a great time today talking about your books. And when are you hoping that, and what is give us the title and what you're hoping for the release day on book 3?
So the title is "In the Service of the King." It's a mouthful. I call it ITSOTIC for short, because it's the abbreviation of it. In the Service of the King. I am shooting for a spring 26 release date. So somewhere in the March, April timeframe is what I'm hoping for. But obviously, updates on that, you can find them on my website if you're interested.
Awesome. So listeners, you have a few months to grab books 1 and 2, so you're ready for the release. If we can get a pre-order link, if we can get a pre-order link, I'll pop it down in the comments below. Thanks for being with us today, and keep writing.